wave.
Très bien, alors bonsoir, bienvenue au centre de l'Université de Chicago à Paris. Je m'appelle Arnaud Coulomvel, je suis responsable des partenariats et des relations extérieures ici au centre. Je vais être très très bref, on est très content de vous avoir ce soir et aussi très honoré de recevoir Nicolas Collins. Quand Arnaud Rivière nous a proposé d'organiser cette conférence dans le cadre du festival Sonic Protest, on a bien sûr été tout à fait enthousiasmé par l'idée. Ça nous a semblé une excellente idée d'organiser une conférence avec Nicolas Collins, qui est donc professeur à l'école d'art de Chicago, école partenaire, pas partenaire, mais enfin qui travaille beaucoup avec l'Université de Chicago dans de nombreux projets de collaboration scientifique. Donc ça faisait tout à fait sens pour nous d'organiser et de recevoir cette conférence. Simplement sur le centre, à quoi sert le centre ? En quelques mots, on accueille donc des étudiants de l'Université de Chicago qui viennent pour un trimestre ou pour une année complète, qui suivent donc des cours ici dans toutes les disciplines, que ce soit en astrophysique, en civilisation française et européenne, en relations internationales, en mathématiques. Donc un étudiant de Chicago peut compléter ou faire son cursus en prenant des cours ici. Ensuite, on organise des colloques, qui sont des collaborations scientifiques entre donc des chercheurs américains et puis des chercheurs européens, là aussi sur tous les domaines. C'est les professeurs qui choisissent ce dont ils veulent parler, ce sur quoi ils veulent échanger. Et puis on organise aussi, comme ce soir, des conférences qui s'adressent à un public plus large. Les conférences, les colloques sont aussi destinés à un public aussi large que possible, mais bon, parfois les thèmes sont tellement spécifiques qu'ils s'adressent quand même surtout à des spécialistes. Mais donc voilà, ce soir une conférence où il y a à la fois des étudiants qui viennent, je crois, de la SAE Institute. Je ne sais pas s'ils sont là. Voilà, merci beaucoup. Donc une école qui est spécialisée dans toutes les questions audio et une école de son, comme on dit, et comme Nicolas Collins est professeur de son à l'école d'art de Chicago, il y aura probablement des questions assez pointues. Probablement aussi des étudiants de l'école de Cergy, peut-être. Voilà, très bien. Arnaud va vous expliquer pourquoi ces étudiants sont là et le contexte dans lequel Nicolas Collins a été invité au festival Sound Project, et puis, qu'est-ce que je dis, Sonic Protest. Et puis, donc aussi des événements qui sont destinés à nos anciens, les anciens de l'Université de Chicago, puisqu'on a une communauté à peu près de 400 anciens qui donc ont fait l'Université de Chicago et sont maintenant établis à Paris. Voilà, donc bienvenue, et puis je laisse la parole à Arnaud Rivière, qui est l'un des masterminds du festival Sonic Protest.
Bonsoir. Merci Arnaud. Moi je vais faire plus rapide. Pour nous il y avait une évidence, Sonic Protest, donc c'est une manifestation qui depuis 12 ans s'intéresse aux expérimentations autour du son, autour de concerts, d'installations, et puis un petit peu depuis cette année et l'année précédente, autour de la transmission à travers des ateliers, des conférences. Et puis en ayant ces préoccupations-là, c'était une évidence pour nous qu'un jour on pouvait inviter Nicolas Collins. Et on a eu le plaisir de voir qu'en fait c'était très simple d'inviter Nicolas Collins, puisqu'il est évidemment, il répond à l'invitation. Et c'est une invitation qui est assez généreuse, puisqu'on a à la fois pu montrer ses travaux sous forme d'installation. On a pu présenter hier un concert de ses œuvres à lui, un concert de restitution d'un atelier qu'il a mené avec les étudiants de l'école d'art de Cergy, d'où le lien avec cette école-là. Et puis Nicolas est allé faire 2 concerts aussi dans des antennes qu'on a dans d'autres villes en France, à Poitiers et à Lille. À Poitiers, il a eu la chance de jouer au Planétarium, et à Lille de faire un atelier avec un collectif d'artistes locaux. Voilà, il y avait toutes ces facettes-là qu'on avait envie de pouvoir montrer et diffuser en France, un pays où Nicolas ne joue pas tant que ça, n'est pas si présent que ça. Donc on était très heureux de l'accueillir pendant 10 jours avec un programme très chargé qui prend fin ce soir. Et c'est l'occasion de lui dire merci.
Merci. Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs. Je parle français exécrable. Je pense qu'il est meilleur si je parle en anglais, pardon. But I'm just another dumb American. But thank you very much for coming, and I'll try to play enough material that if you don't understand my words, you'll have at least 50% of the evening well in hand. I'm going to talk about my own work because I wasn't given another topic like world hunger that I could address. But I'm going to try because I can't imagine that many of you are actually interested in my work. So I try to connect it to ideas that may have more application. And I steal. So I'm going to start with two kind of twisted truisms. Jared Diamond, whose work you probably know, Guns, Germs, and Steel, etc., essentially a geographer, but rather a polymath, twisted the old English cliche that necessity is the mother of invention to say invention is the mother of necessity. He pointed out that a great many significant inventions that we benefit from and have benefited from lay around waiting for an application for a long period of time. In my own profession of working with sound, perhaps the most glaring example is the gramophone, which when Edison invented his particular take on the cylinder, he believed it would never be used for music and that the market was for recording the speeches of famous people, like collecting autographs. And he maintained until his death that there was really no acceptable way to use it for sound and music. So he was wrong. And the invention was right. And in my world, form follows dysfunction, which is very often new forms arise from the kind of misappropriation and misuse of otherwise very functional objects and technology. So here is a piece of old music from Venice. Guami was a contemporary of the Gabriellis, you can probably tell by ear, 1600. And this is my version of the same piece. So you hear a live trumpet, an actual trumpet playing, and the other instrument is this. And now I think both are examples of music on the original instruments, because this instrument is now as obscure as a Baroque violin is. But if you speak to older people, they remember the compact disc and an instrument for playing it. And give some background. I'm a New Yorker, and I grew up in New York. And when I moved back to New York from Wesleyan University, go West, in 1980, this was the music that I found most interesting. I had come out of an education with composers like Alvin Lucier and John Cage, but the very early hip-hop scene was developing in the South Bronx, and I was fascinated by the transformation of the record player into a performance instrument. A lot of early electronic music, by which I'm talking 60s and 70s, was about reappropriating consumer technology for musical performance, tape recorders, record players, radios. And it was wonderful for me to see essentially a popular music genre being built on the back of this idea that you can turn a piece of furniture, which is really what record players were at that time, into a musical instrument. So I wanted to be a DJ, but the problem is, look at me, I'm a little guy, and the idea of carrying all those records and turntables in addition to all of the other stuff that I needed to do my concerts with was too much. So I waited and I waited and I waited, and sure enough, in the future things will be smaller and lighter, so you can put more of them in the same suitcase and it will weigh just as much. But there is the psychology of small and light and miniature, and that was the CD. And I sort of knew my way around electronics a little bit from having made very bad electronic circuits as a hungry young composer without access to equipment. And I opened up my CD player and I poked around and I discovered that there was a pin on this master chip that was labeled mute. Now if you're a trombone player, a mute is a wonderful thing. But if you're a red diaper baby, a 68er, mute means, you know, it's a politically unacceptable thing to do to a young revolutionary composer. So I removed it, like a boy taking the leg off of a fly. That's it. That's the pin that is now peeing on a lamppost, to do another rude analogy. When the mute pin on a CD was removed, you heard everything, okay? And a CD was designed with a certain sense of couture, that there were things you were supposed to see and hear and things that you weren't supposed to see and hear. I ripped it naked, and I discovered that there were all these wonderful noises that came out of the CD at odd times, like when you went from the first track to the last track, or when you put it in pause. These are sounds that are now a very familiar part of the sonic landscape. The whole glitch music scene, especially coming out of Berlin in the 90s, featured this. Groups like Oval and Microstoria from Köln and Berlin. Even Madonna used a skipping CD on one of her worst records in the late 90s. But this is, you know, I just like to point out the history here. We may have been wrong, but we were early. And I found that if you took a record and put it in pause, like a skipping record on a record player, but with a CD, you got this wonderful sort of swing to the rhythm. What you heard first was 22 seconds of this canzone. When I do it by play, pause, slowly letting myself step through the music, it's isolating these little fragments of music, and it stretches 20 seconds to 10 minutes. If you haven't noticed this already in your short lives, one of the classic axioms of the avant-garde is slow it down a lot, and I was simply carrying that out. So I drag out recordings. I discovered that the oddest music becomes most beautiful when it's transformed this way, and late Renaissance and early Baroque music sounded fantastic to my ear. You would not guess to look at me, but I am 50% Chilean, and my mother, I blame her for coming from the only country in Latin America with no soul whatsoever. And I love Latin music, but I'm a classic gringo, that I never know where the claves are going to land. And that is the great distinction in Latin music fans, is if they know where the claves land and when not. For me, that glitch, digital glitch on the Baroque music was the white man's clave. Here was finally something that was kind of dumb enough that I could understand it, sin la sangre. And so this worked great for me. And I did a series of pieces which were for recordings of early music and live musicians. This was a piece for string quartet where the players had this little system, and this was in the days when computers were big, so this was a nice alternative to working with a computer. They had these little pedals that they pressed to navigate through it, and it was in this piece, which the group dutifully played several times. But I discovered, lesson to young composers, string players don't like to do things with their feet. They like to do things with their hands. Who'da thunk it? Who'da thunk it? But, so I did a number of pieces. Then I had a day of fellowship as a composer, the Künstler program in Berlin. Wonderful. It's like grabbing the gold ring on a merry-go-round. And this was in the 90s. I worked with this wonderful ensemble, the Kammerensemble Neue Musik Berlin. They wanted to do a version of that piece that you heard with the skipping CD and the trumpet for a larger group. And they said, we don't want to work with all the technology. I said, excuse me, it's a CD player. And they still said, but it means, I said, all right, whatever. And so what I did was I essentially orchestrated the CD piece for acoustic ensemble. And I did it with a very open form score where you have the notation material on one side of the page and you have instructions for how to play variations on the other. Why do I tell you this? I tell you this because here's a music piece that arose from one particular piece of misused technology, but for me it generated a form that I could then carry and plops down on what we might call a more or less conventional group. So here's a little bit of the expensive version of the same piece. No technology, but many musicians. Very bad scans, I'm sorry, they don't project well. Right? So that's that. Another example. So, this is really old. Smell that? That's patchouli and marijuana. You can feel them coming off the screen. 1974. When I arrived at Wesleyan and fell under the twin influences of Alvin Lucier, who was doing music about kind of acoustical phenomena of various sort, and Cage was a very strong presence at the school. I had one of those really kind of like existential moments that you have in your life where I'd work on like some kind of sound thing on a synthesizer, and I'd say, that sounds cool, and then I'd do another sound thing. That sounds cool. Which one is cooler? Which one should be first? Which one should be second? Complete paralysis. Making decisions after Cage is really difficult. So I started working with feedback. Everybody loves feedback. Every young composer does feedback pieces. I over-intellectualized it, though. I looked at feedback, I said, the infinite amplification of silence. What could be more zen, you know? And I'm the product of two architectural historians, so I had a natural affinity for doing pieces that were about architectural space. And when you do feedback, you're basically playing the overtones of a room as if it were a natural bugle or trumpet, right? All the pitches, when a sound engineer goes like, and pulls the mic away from a speaker, it's basically blowing overtones of the room. So I discovered this cool circuit, very obscure box. In the days before digital technology, it introduced very, very, very small time delays, microseconds of time delay to audio. It's what makes that cool flangey sound in all bad disco music, if you want to know. But you can use it for other things, and you can use it to virtually move a microphone around a room, so that from the comfort of your own seat, you can be kind of playing the room. And I set up this little, very simple network with just a microphone, a speaker, and that box, 3 of them. And it would make these patterns that you're hearing now, sort of ragas that would be made out of the resonances of the room. And they slowly go through variation, and they're hyper sensitive to changes in the acoustics. So if you walk a few feet, after a few seconds, one note will go away from the melody and another will come in. Or it won't. And if you play a sound, sometimes the feedback will zoop and it will lock onto it. If you play out of tune with the feedback, sometimes you can cancel the feedback. If you play an octave or a fifth above the feedback, it'll jump to it. If you play a note that you haven't heard for 5 minutes, the feedback will say, oh, I remember that note, and it'll come back. Very spooky, very trippy. Let's put it bluntly, it was a late 60s piece, but I was a slow developer, so I waited until 1974 to make it. But it was redolent of the time. So, those boxes were a little rare, and I never owned them. They were in our studio. So, years later, I was asked to revive the piece, and I did what every composer was doing at that time, which is, because I couldn't buy these for love or money, I did buy them, but they were always broken. I cloned them in software. It wasn't really terribly difficult. And I made this patch. Now, the nice thing about writing software, it's not as physical as having little boxes on the table, but I can put this program on my website and anyone can download it and perform it. Whereas those circuits, there's only maybe 100 in the world and 99 of them are broken. So, it's not going to get performed. So now I have something that is, for a composer of my technique, which is basically electronic stuff, I have something that's almost as portable as a paper score in terms of the ability to disseminate it and have it performed. It only took me like 40 years to figure that one out, but I did. And I created this version, and then we sort of revived the piece and sort of changed the performance instructions to make it a little more appropriate to modern times. And I want to draw your attention to one incomprehensible block here, which is that when you have feedback in a room going through this, certain frequencies dominate. That's the way acoustics are. If you sing in a shower, you'll notice there's one note that's always stronger. You hear that note a lot in this system. So in the old days, you used to try to find that note with the equalization on a mixer or something and dip it out so that other notes could be heard. It's kind of like when you grow up in a large family and there is always one older brother who dominates the conversation at dinner. And you have to wait for him to go to the bathroom before you can talk, right? Or, if it's America, you have to kill him. So, what I did when I made this is I made an older brother destroyer, which is that at any point, if I say I've heard too much of that frequency, I can hit the X on my keyboard, and a little filter will come in and dip down and effectively mute that one frequency. And then these others come in. And it's very interesting because what you get then, after you've done 5 or 6 of these, you actually get a harmonic movement in the room, where previously the room was very modal, always the same pitches. Suddenly you'll get these strange harmonic motions because the strong pitches will go away and these sort of strangely spaced harmonics will come back. That, ha-ha, ha-ha, I said, that in and of itself is kind of cool. Because let's face it, I was dragging around the world a piece I'd written when I was 20, and I was getting a little gray. I was thinking it was time for something new. So what I did was I extracted that thing, and I stretched it out, and I made a very simple little program that turns up the microphone. You start to have feedback. A filter comes in, dips it out, feedback stops. Then it goes up a little bit, gets the next one, next one, next one, next one, until, I don't know, I think there's 24, how many are there? 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 24, I thought it was 24. So you have these 24 pitches from the strongest to the weakest. And each time a pitch is zapped out, it appears up here. So what you get is you get a tone row. You get a tone row where the left end is the strongest frequency in the room, and this is the little brother. This is the weirdest frequency in the whole room. Okay? So what I do is I set this thing up in a concert space. You have a speaker, you have a microphone. In 90 seconds, you get this idyllic little sequence of subdued feedback. And the score gradually fills in like some sort of demented karaoke game. And then, after the little 90-second prelude is over, the band starts to play. And what we do is the conductor can highlight groups of notes and sort of move through this so that the players then re-articulate this tone row that came from the room. And here's a middle of the piece. You can see they're playing the red notes and those indicated overtones. This is this wonderful ensemble of Fred Fritz at Mills College. He runs an improvisation ensemble. And they're instructed to do very simple improvisations on the notes that are indicated. Periodically, you go through the change from one chord to the next. And it's quite lovely because you need a little bit of technology to kick this thing into gear. But after that, you have a 15-minute piece that is basically site-specific, notated music. In other words, I could set the thing up in this room, we would go bing, 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 and you would have a piece of music that was literally the music for this room. And tomorrow, you could come back, and I could be in Liège, and you would still have this score, and every day for the rest of your life you could play the music of this room just by reading off this score. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. You can see that that's what's happened to me. And it's when it works, and it does require a certain sort of relaxed approach to improvisation. It's very easy to overplay this. It's very nice. It sort of sounds like Satie meets Feldman on a bad day. I have a great love of boredom, so you have to forgive me if I wallow in this. By the way, there's a whole other bunch of players that are in the back of the hall. Most people are playing around the space. Gabrielli again. It's just the people with these amplifiers, we had to keep them up there. They all got cricks in their neck from looking at the score. So, here comes a change. You hear these weird changes. Where do they come from? You know, this is the room playing harmonic games with us. And I find it quite charming to sort of ferret out this this sense of the, as it were, the distant harmony of the room. So there we have like another 1-2 derivation. That the original piece was done with technology. It was a very electronic piece. The sound material was feedback. It existed, you know, in terms of this sort of self-stabilizing quasi-cybernetic system. And you give a guy long enough time to think about it, and he figures out a way to do it with other resources. And here we have a piece that has a very modest technological sort of crank at the beginning, but then it basically is a piece of ensemble music, just like the Still Afterlives piece was a piece of ensemble music derived from a skipping CD. This is a piece of ensemble music derived from a weird 70s electronic music patch. All right. It really looks like a still. Nothing happens in this thing at all. All right. So you've been very patient, and now I give you the gritty stuff. When I left the university with a master's degree, the most useless degree in the world, by the way, and I was a freelance composer and musician for 20 years. I had all sorts of jobs ranging from the fabulous, I was the artistic director of Stein in Amsterdam for many years, to the really horrendous, welcome to the real world, college graduates. And then I was in Berlin, it was 99, and my children were hungry. And they said, "Daddy, get a job." So I took the first place it would take me, which was, points here, Chicago. So I started teaching in the Department of Sound at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which is an old established art school, reputed to be always one of the top 2 or 3 art schools in America. And since the 1970s, they've had a Department of Sound. Not music, but sound. And it was sort of a prototype for the idea of sound art, because it was about teaching artists, basically visual artists, how to work with sound as a material. Rather pioneering idea on the part of the few people who set it up. Now, having been educated in a very avant-garde setting, I would annually encounter a situation at the end of a concert where someone, not always a relative, would come up to me and say, "That's very nice, Nicky, but it's not music." And I have to say that since I took my job, no one has come up to me and said, "That's very nice, Nicky, but it's not sound." The power of language, even though some of the pieces were very quiet, you know, I mean, the absence of sound is considered to be sound, but the absence of music is not considered to be music. Case made. All right. So I arrived there at this school, and it's 99. Everyone is immersed in computers. Everybody but the painters are using computers. I like to say, Command X, Command V, you can rule the world. It's the meta tool. You can cut words, video, sound, graphic design, drawings, HTML code. What am I missing? Rearrange JPEGs, everything. It's incredible. It's like a pencil could do all this. But the problem is, all artists start out messy. Take it from me. 2 kids, messy. They all start out messy. This thing, I love it. It is not tactile. I could make a rude analogy. I won't. I'll just say it's not tactile. A mouse, a trackpad, a keypad, it's not like playing a snare drum or playing a guitar or bagpipes, for God's sake. It just doesn't do that thing. Now, my students were in this kind of schizophrenic position where all their sound world was electronic. Yeah? Everything they heard was through speakers or earbuds. I don't think any of them had ever been to a concert of acoustic instruments unamplified. Yeah? But they wanted to touch things. So they looked at me and they said, "Man, you are really old. You must remember what life was like before computers." And I said, "We rode horses too." And so they asked me to do a class in electronic resources for artists that were about the things that computers don't do well. Yeah? So we concentrated on basically in two areas. One is performable instruments, things that you can really touch, but work with electronic sound. And the other is unusual microphones, because you can very, very inexpensively build wonderful microphones and pickups that allow you to hear all these strange things in the world. And it's the input for so much later work. So it's very liberating. So here's what happened. I did a kind of a PDF for my students. This is like admitting that you're patient zero for smallpox, all right? I did this PDF and it escaped from the school and it got into the hands of a publisher. And the publisher decided, for reasons that I still don't understand, to make it a book. And then it was like a virus and it just sort of ruined a lot of people's lives, for which I apologize. And I've been doing workshops in containing the virus all over the world. Just did one in Paris. I failed miserably at preventing my students from making electronic sound, but they did. So I'm going to play you a short video sampler of what these workshops look like so you can see what you should not do. So we begin with just a loudspeaker and a battery. And by making contact, we get the speaker to jump. And we can create all sorts of instruments just using this technique. Self-oscillating. Very visual artists, you know. How meta, documenting documentation, right? I should be a semiologist. So put them on a drum, they sort of play the drum. And we build these little contact mics. Here they're feeding back between the microphone and the speaker. Inductive pickups, they pick up electromagnetic fields. Again, more feedback. It's a natural technique. We open up radios and we put wet fingers on them and we turn them into touch-sensitive synthesizers. Everyone sounds different. They read your moods. Very similar to lie detectors. And then we do circuit bending. We open up toys and modify them. Sometimes, again, it's just skin on the circuit. Best toys by far in Japan, I have to tell you. So cool. And then we build our own little circuits. Here we're making oscillators that you can control with all sorts of things, from light to your skin to potatoes. Very simple circuits. No computers. Light is always a very, very good gestural interface. Photoresistors. Aix-en-Provence. Toujours amour. Oui. Okay, so yeah, so I do these little workshops, and here's why I dropped out of academia at the end of my master's. I was teaching. All graduate students teach. We are slaves, and I started to believe what I was teaching, which sounds like what you're supposed to do. But actually, when you teach, you very often simplify your ideas to communicate them. And when you start to believe your simplified ideas, you enter a sort of an endless spiral of a non-productive form of minimalism, I would say. So I found when I went back to teaching later, I had a little bit more resistance about this, and I was able to spin off variations of the things that were really essential to me rather than simplify the stuff that was super important. But I will have to say that the experience of re-examining this sort of technology that was where I had originated, and I then tried to update, so that when I was doing a hacking workshop in 2007, I wasn't simply replicating what we were doing in 1977. I found that process made me aware of things that I'd sort of forgotten. I'd worked with computers for years. You saw the software up there. And working with the hardware made me aware of how versatile it is for generating chaotic and uncertain outcomes. And having been a sort of a caged baby, there was part of me was always searching for uncertainty. Everybody else is searching for certainty. I'm searching for uncertainty. So there was a trickle down from the workshops into pieces of mine. This is a piece where 6 players try to reanimate a dead circuit board by sending small currents into it. And it starts out relatively cause and effect-y, but by the time you've added the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th person, it becomes a kind of a 6-channel complex oscillator with lots of interactions, so that it actually does perform things very similar to turbulence in waterfalls and things like that. And you get a rather interesting sound world out of it. And it's a very interesting experiment in social dynamics amongst the players when they try to cooperate and compete. So you're going to see just the first couple of minutes of an early version of this piece from Tokyo. it goes on. It goes on, and yeah, it's Nick's Bolero. But it gets more complicated and topsy-turvy as the thing goes on. And it's an interesting example of how the natural chaos of those workshops was a revelation to me. Because most electronic music is a rather orderly thing. It comes out of two speakers and it's mixed. And in the workshops, everyone has their own little speaker, maybe several of them. They're distributed over the table. You get this nice landscape. And you get this odd notion of all these people working at the same time, working on sort of the same project, but they're not trying to play with each other, right? They're not trying to play a tune. So you get this nice sort of statistical center with variation. And that sort of sound world led to pieces like this. Last thing I'm going to play you, and then I'm happy to answer any questions or just shut up, is when you have to demonstrate the same thing over and over and over again, you keep looking for variations. I have a wonderful guitarist friend who was in an indie band that was kind of popular for a while, and they used to do those tours where they would do 28 gigs in 30 days, and he'd have to do an interview with a college radio station every day. And he said, do you know what it's like to have to answer the same question every day for a month? He said, really, it's cruel and unusual punishment. So when I'm demonstrating these wonderful things called contact mics, which are like stethoscopes, they pick up little vibration, I'm always looking for something to amplify. And one classroom I was in, I was noticing that I was immediately under a smoke detector. And being the contrarian that I was, I said, I should really set something on fire here and see if that works. So there's a form of fireworks we use in America called sparklers, which are things that most commonly used to frighten younger siblings when you chase them with this thing. And they go, ah! Because there are all these sparks coming off. They're magnificent. Cruel, but magnificent. And they make a fantastic sound. So I lit the sparkler and clamped it onto the contact mic, and the sprinkler did not go off. Which makes for a boring story, except that there used to be a beautiful gallery, the first gallery for sound art in New York, that was in Brooklyn, and run by Michael Shoemaker, not the race car driver. And I was asked to do a piece there, and they had a very nice room with 3 video projectors and 3 very nice sound systems. So I did a 3-channel video projection of these sparklers burning down, and it was just a loop. The sparkler takes almost 2 minutes to burn. And this is a 1-screen reduction of that, just so you can get something. And listen, there's a tag end on it. So, that's it. I'm going to turn this buzz down. There we go. what can I say? Imagine it in a dark room with one of those on each of 3 walls and a really nice subwoofer on each channel. Imagine it, okay? Imagine it. Do me a favor. And that's it. Questions, as we like to say.
Don't be shy.
I'll tell you a story. There's a wonderful American pianist turned composer named Jerry Hunt. He was from Texas, and he was a real Texas guy. And he chewed nicotine gum nonstop in an attempt to stop smoking. And he made his first trip to Europe to do concerts. And his music was, one might call, shamanistic. He used to sort of have weird electronic sound going on while he stomped around the room, shaking sticks and rattles at the ceiling. It was a somewhat intimidating thing to see. And we were staying in the same guest house in Amsterdam. And the morning after his first concert, I met him at breakfast, and I said, "So how did it go?" And he said, "Well, Nick, you know when you're driving down a country road and suddenly your headlights catch the eyes of a wild animal on the road?" I said, "Well, I am from New York, but yes, I have been in the country from time to time, and I do know that experience. Maybe you have wilder animals where you grew up, but yes. Your point being," he said, "Nick, when the lights went up at the end of my concert, that's just what my audience looked like." So there we go. You're in a great tradition. Now, that doesn't soften them up. There we go. You see, that's all it took.
I have 2 questions, actually. The very first piece that you shared with us, if the musicians have been willing to use the foot technology, how many musicians would you have needed for that piece instead of?
Well, let's see. The very first thing I played was a piece for the Giuseppe Guami music and a single trumpet player. And that particular piece has a text in it, a spoken text, so it's always been done as a duo between me and a musician. So I take care of all the electronic stuff. The piece where you saw the little pedals, that was for a string quartet. And it was for a string quartet with a skipping CD of, Stefano's going to be very mad when I say this, what I call the pasta composers, Corelli, Torelli, and Locatelli. It was a somewhat tasteless record of winter music, what they like to call winter music of concerti grossi for strings. And it just worked brilliantly when it was skipping. So that was a string quartet playing against a skipping CD of a string orchestra. And that was four musicians. When I went to do the piece for the ensemble in Berlin, there was no CD player at all. They simply did it acoustically. The only technology they had to have was a watch. And they admitted that they could use a watch. Does that explain? Does that answer your question?
Yes, and then among the four, would each of them be controlling?
Well, that was my idea. Give 4 pedals to 4 musicians and let them fight it out. But as luck would have it, they all sort of said, "Oh, no, you can do it. So one musician, the one who was sort of most used to working with technology, ended up, the second violin, there we go. The second violinist ended up doing all the pedal pressing. I'll have to say that it was an early point in the history of what we might call interactive music, that at that time we were in this transition, that there's a long tradition in the contemporary music world of pieces for an instrument and a tape, like a tape. So the tape is fixed. It's what's now called fixed media. You have the tape playing, and the musician has a score where there are little indications of what's happening on the tape, and then they play whatever happens. And it's locked. It's great for composers who know what they want. I never know what I want. So I write pieces that are very open. So I could never work with tape because it was too stiff. I needed something stretchy. These days we use computers. And I can write a program, any of you can write a program on the computer that listens to a musician So if the musician goes slower, the music goes slower. If the music goes faster. You can make things that are much more interesting in terms of interaction. In 1988, 1990, that was a little difficult to do with computers. You could, but it was kind of a pain and you needed a big machine. So for me, the CD let you do a kind of elastic manipulation of a backing material. And the skip let me have this sort of automatic variation. The irony is that when that CD player broke, I copied its behavior in software, and it was a completely natural adaptation. In other words, it had proto-digital behavior as a machine that was made to malfunction that, in a sense, predicted what you could do with software later. That's more than you wanted to hear. My children accused me of TMI, too much information. But that's what question and answers are all about.
Can I ask a second question?
Boy, you don't give up. Please, go ahead.
It's more general.
Oh, all right, fine. What sign am I?
Well, the sparklers, it struck me as such a great sound effect for movies, and I wondered if, when you watch movies, do you ever wonder, are you ever struck by particular sounds and start wondering where they come from and how they were made?
Yes. Usually I don't have to wonder because I can kind of tell. That's like ear training for the avant-garde, is that you listen to sound effects tracks instead of counterpoint. But I will tell you that I look out at my students and I think, oh my God, what am I doing? Because they think that if they study this stuff, they will be as fabulously successful as Nick Collins is. No, they don't think that. But, you know, investing in education in America is an unbelievable commitment that a whole family makes. It's terribly expensive. And when you look at students and you envision their future, and they're a painter, and they somehow believe that they will paint, and they will be the next, I don't know, Julian Schnabel. There's a lot of, there's a lot of tension that goes along with sort of shepherding these people out into the world. I can say with all honesty that in my department, we give them a very marketable skill, which is sound design. And I have to say that I go to a lot of computer music conferences, a lot of weird festivals of weird music. In my mind, the most interesting and creative work that's being done in pure sound today is in high-budget film production. That the amount of creativity that goes into the sound effects that most people don't even notice is phenomenal. And if you ever have the chance to get a hold of a master print of a film where you can break down the tracks and you can eliminate the music and you can eliminate the dialogue and just listen to sound effects sync to picture, it's an amazing experience in terms of how people construct these artificial realities. And the process is fascinating too, because it's a strange mix of technologies, from pure computer generation of sound to, God, if I was the sea lion that was used for just about every sound effect in Lord of the Rings, I would be so rich. Every goddamn monster in that thing started out as a sea lion somewhere in California. The Pavarotti of the sea world. So yeah, TMI, I do like listening to movie soundtracks. Somebody else. No, you're very kind. You broke the ice. I admire you for that and for asking questions that make me uncomfortable. Very good. Yes?
Well, you mentioned that the master's degree is the most useless degree we can get nowadays.
Yeah.
And
you just got one and you're really proud of it.
I'm not really proud of it. I'm just...
No, you know what I discovered? If you get a Master of Fine Arts, it's considered to be a terminal degree, an MFA. Yeah, it's like a terminal degree in the creative arts, even though now they're giving more PhDs in the creative arts. But a master's, I discovered after I dropped out, is really considered a stepping stone to a doctorate. And for academic positions, these days at a college level, the doctorate is really demanded for just about everything.
I know.
And I got a doctorate very late in life just to spite someone. I said, God damn it, I'm going to get it. And it took me several weeks, and I really was angry about that. But I did it. And I'm a better person for it. No. I would say that a master's degree is not useless in terms of what you learn. But I will have to say that it's been devalued as a piece of paper. And that, I'm sorry to break your heart, but it is kind of the truth.
I guess my question was, what would you recommend young creative people instead of getting a degree? Like, how should they go about their lives?
You should flee. You should flee academia and become extremely successful in your profession, so they are courting you instead of you're asking for a job. It's called debtor's leverage. It's terrific. I got my teaching job. I just had a master's when they took me, and the reason was that, and this is very true in the creative arts, is that they count kind of experience in the field as equivalent. So very often when you see job listings for artists, they'll say, PhD or extensive professional experience, and they sort of weigh those two things against it. I think in the arts, it's a really delicate question in hiring, because art departments and art schools like to have a balance between sort of academics who are good at teaching and, say, are good at research and writing, and then to have actual practicing artists who represent something real. John Baldessari, very famously, when he was asked, how do you make a great art school? He was at Cal Arts, and then he went to UCLA. He said, you hire great artists. They cannot teach at all, but that attracts great students who teach each other. And the best art schools that I've had contact with basically work that way. You have a bunch of drunken or stoned faculty members who are there because they have charisma, and then the students kind of take care of themselves, Boy, I am burning my bridges to this institution, am I not? Chicago is very different. It's a respectable institution, thank you, with a long pedigree of liberal arts education and a valuable degree. Yes?
Your first, this man?
Yes.
The prototype of this man is mainly a sample.
It sounds like a sample.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's when samples appears,
Oh, that's, I should know the answer to that. Samples appeared in the early to mid 1980s. The very first unbelievably expensive instrument made by a company called EU, I think, was made in 79 or 80. But affordable ones that could be used by working musicians came out sort of, they kind of hit the market 83 to 85. And it coincides very neatly with the emergence of hip hop as an art form, because I don't mean to be even older than I am, but what I loved about early hip hop was that it was the record player, was the sampler. So people had to develop this virtuosic technique to make the kinds of sounds that, as you say, sound as though they're coming from a sampler. By 1985-86, a lot of hip hop production was being done with early samplers, and it just propelled the genre. Because, to be quite honest, it was much easier to produce in a studio environment on a sampler than with turntables. It was just, it was easier. It was physically easier. You didn't need the same degree of virtuosity. Does that answer the question? Basically, anything getting played back these days sounds like a sampler. It's short. And if I play you an entire track, it sounds like I'm playing the track. If I play you for a second, it sounds like a sample. I mean, that's psychoacoustics. Yeah.
When you were talking about the collection of pitches that comes from feedback in a room, you mentioned the word raga, which would be an allusion to the South Indian Carnatic concept. And I think you were just making
Or North Indian.
Or North Indian. But since Wesleyan has such a long tradition of world music, I'm wondering if you've taken inspiration from that in your work also?
Or it was just the 70s?
You see, and if truth be known, I went to Wesleyan to study Indian music. That was just how misguided I was at the age of 17. Think about it, right? And so, I did Indian music very intensively for 4 years in parallel to studying experimental music with Lussier. It was a classic French farce, pardon the expression, of having one girlfriend you go out with on Friday night and one on Saturday, and you're trying to make sure they don't meet each other, because there was absolutely no communication at that time between the sort of composition program at Wesleyan and the world music program. It was very strange, but it was true. There was no sharing. So I had to sort of scuttle from one building to another to do my two paths. And in the end, I found that, I realized I would never be a performer of Indian music. I mean, that was why I ever thought I could. I had no idea. But when you're 17, you're immortal, right? But obviously, the pedagogy of studying with a teacher from India, with the educational system they use for music instruction, was fantastic for me as an alternative to Western education. And I think there was a lot about the structure of Indian music that I retained in certain ways. And that notion that there are hundreds of different ways of organizing pitches, you don't just have to work with the way we have them, say, laid out on the piano, is kind of obvious to anybody these days. But back in the 70s, it took a little while to figure it out, and it kind of stuck with me. Are you the Wesleyan student?
I am a Wesleyan student, yeah.
Go West.
Go West.
All right. Yes?
Do you think that modern music is innovative enough, or that producers and composers have been kind of lazy lately into sound design stuff, or?
Is it innovative enough? Wow. As a whole, I've never read. You see, there's so much music out there. I mean, it's absolutely terrifying how much music there is out there. And I have a feeling that I've maybe heard 0.01% of what's being made. I still hear innovative work being done. I'm very wary of innovation for innovation's sake. As Robert Ashley once famously said, I'd rather hear an old idea done well than a new idea done badly. But my particular area of interest is in kind of like emerging musical cultures that arise from, especially from technological adaptation. I'm always interested in seeing what the trickle down is from the next piece of technology that we depend upon for something very basic. Yeah. And because technology does progress, culture doesn't really. But technology does. And so if you link things to that, I think there's always something at least interesting being done. Whether it's high quality or not is always another question. I see little pockets of stuff happening in places, and I kind of like that.
And precisely about this relationship between tradition, innovation, and technology.
Mm-hmm. The question is safe.
I'm not sure how I'm going to formulate my question, but I was very surprised by what you said, because we think about you as an avant-gardist.
Me?
Yes.
Theory.
Yeah.
I think of myself as so middle of the road.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like so bourgeois.
I had a misinterpretation
Huh.
about your work.
Okay.
Okay.
Maybe you hired the wrong Nick. There's another Nick Collins who's a Super Collider programmer in England. He's hot. He's younger than me.
I'm talking about.
Okay, yes, please, sorry.
Okay. So here's my question. When I heard you speaking, I was very much struck by something. The fact that when you talk about the use of technology, you refer to raga, which is very traditional.
Mm.
You refer to Baroque music, Chile, very traditional.
Mm-hmm.
You refer to water fountain, which is
To what? I'm sorry?
Water fountain.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Water turbines. Yes. Yeah.
Your workshop,
Yeah.
which is the reproduction by technology of a natural sound.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting. The fact that what you do is very innovative, but it seems that what you want to do is to try to reproduce something which already exists.
Oh,
which has
try to reproduce
Yes.
something that already
Something
exists.
which,
Huh.
the raga,
Mm.
and baroque music, a natural sound. But technology is here to perform it differently.
Yes. I think where I would, the only place I differ with you is I wouldn't, I hope I'm not trying to reproduce something that already exists, because I am a victim of that weird Western notion of progress. You know, that I actually am very seriously trying to make something new that hasn't been made before, rather than just add to, say, an existing body. But I agree that my ideas, I mean, I don't know anybody who creates things out of a vacuum. You know, everybody is going to point to historical antecedents. It may be the history of last week, or it may be the history of 1500. But you know, people make ideas from things. It's not Deus ex machina. Yes.
But it's more your philosophy.
Mm.
When you say uncertainty, say
Yeah.
uncertainty.
I crave uncertainty.
Yes,
That's a career killer, by the way. Yes.
it is.
Yeah.
But then the result in which you arrive is very connected
Yeah.
to a certain form of
Yeah.
cultural determinism.
Oh, yeah. I mean, have you ever asked anyone to alter a random number sequence? I mean, it's almost impossible. You know, randomness is such a weird thing that you try to do. I mean, this is the great. God, there's so much written and by and about Cage and his impact and blah 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 blah. But a fellow student of mine, once said that for everything that he did, the single most profound idea was the elimination of the ego. And he said that was the one thing that no other composer was able to accept. So much of what he's done has been accepted and varied and, as you say, adapted and reproduced by other composers. But at the heart of it was that notion of giving up any sense of the self. And early on in my exposure to him and his cult, I realized that I was no better than any of the other composers around me. I couldn't give it up. But I look for things that interest me, and they may not interest everybody, but those are the things that I put into a piece. But I think there's always a sense of trying to pull my identity back from it and make a piece that reflects not me, but the things I'm interested in, if you know what I mean.
Okay. Why did you give the following title to one of your work, The Devil's Music?
Oh, The Devil's Music, right. Well, I actually have an answer for that one. It's not just I was struck by lightning. I have this piece I did in 1985 that used very early samplers, some of the very first affordable samplers. There were these little boxes. Actually, they were what now would be called a looping pedal. It was a box that let you grab a loop of sound, and you could loop it. You could make it go backwards. You could slow it down, speed it up. It was like, whoa, amazing. And I did a piece where I basically DJ'd. This was my first attempt at DJing without carrying records. I DJ'd with live radio transmissions. So what I would do is I would listen to the radio, and I'd scan through and I'd find, this was 1985. There's great dance music in New York in 1985, and I would grab like 1 second, 2 seconds of a dance track. And I had hacked, of course, these pedals so that they never repeated the same. They would always stutter, which again became a signature sound in sampling, was that sort of multiple attack thing. So you get these funny little loops going of this riff that, because it kept re-triggering at odd places, sounded much longer than it was. Yeah? And then I'd go and I'd find like an advertisement in Portuguese, and I'd grab that as a vocal to go on top. My Portuguese is very bad, so I'm not going to imitate it. And then I'd get something else. And so I had these three little samplers, and then I'd sort of do this kind of bucket brigade thing of, oh man, that dance groove's been going on long enough, let me replace it with something else. And it was like a piece of folk music, because wherever you went, you worked with the local radio transmissions, you know, so it was very topical. People thought, oh, it's just some damn piece of electronic music. And then they'd hear an announcer or a sports event that was taking place there, and they said, whoa. So it had a nice quality of sort of entering into a community and their local radio at a time when radio was important. Right? It had this very strange rhythm. A friend of mine said it's like an intro that never settles into a groove, because it kept, you know, sort of going like this. So it had that quality of like a St. Vitus's dance, of sort of being possessed and being in a state. Okay? At the same time, Al Gore's wife, Tipper Gore, was leading a campaign in Congress to have labels put on records whenever they said the words I won't say here because you're young people and I shouldn't say them in front of you. It was called the Parents Music Research Committee. And as a result of that, to this day, young people, when you go to buy hip-hop, it always has a label on it saying, not for young children, or whatever. Well, one of the things she was very concerned about was that when you played heavy metal records backwards, you would get a clear message that said, kill your parents, steal their money, vote Democratic. You know, this was bad. So this idea that the devil was speaking from the records was very important.
Vote Democratic or vote Republican?
I'm not going to answer that. So, and then of course you do know that there's, in the history of rock and roll, there was this point at which there was this real division between the sacred and the profane. And a lot of artists like Al Green, Little Richard, Sam Cooke, did both gospel music and rock and roll. And they would always refer to the rock and roll as the devil's music, because it wasn't serving a higher cause. So it was those three things that caused me to give it a title. I figured if I had three reasons to give the piece the title, I was better than I did on most days. There you have it, from the horse's mouth. Authentic.
Do you ever go to studios where you like sound or like?
Oh, are you from SAE? Thank you. I was warned. I actually worked as an engineer in the 80s. I had a day job working for a company that designed and installed recording studios, which was great in terms of the trickle down that I had, both in terms of technology and information. And I was producing records for various indie bands in New York at that time, as well as doing records for the unlikeliest of people. I did engineering for Lucier, I did engineering for David Tudor. I did record production for a number of improvisers in the free improvised music scene, and for a bunch of indie rock bands. So yes, I have spent a lot of time in studios. That's why I'm very pale, you'll notice. Studio tan. I had a lovely little studio in New York in my loft before I moved to Europe. I sold all my equipment in order to finance moving my little family to Europe. And since then, I've been sort of the Flying Dutchman of recording studios, just sort of setting up what I need where I go. But I'm very unusual in that as a composer of just about any type of music at the moment, I do very, very little recording. All of my work is based on live performance. So it's rare that I get involved in recording. I just did a project that a very nice book press published between Lausanne and here called Rip On Off published an edition of my writing translated into French, which I thought was insane. I thought, there already is no audience for this. Are you looking for an audience even smaller than zero? You know? But they did it, and I'm quite happy because they let me put a DVD in the back instead of a CD. And I had been working on some pieces that could be documented in video, and I went out on that very shaky limb that is doing a 5.1 mix, even though I don't have a 5.1 sound system in my house, and nobody I know has one. I figured somewhere in the world there must be a 5.1 sound system, and it's probably owned by a gamer. So I thought, I'll make the disc for him, her. And that was quite interesting. I learned a lot, and I learned that down mixing from 5.1 is impossible to get a straight answer on. There.
For example, the last word you shared with us, do you record yourself? Or
Everything except... No. That last, the sparklers?
Yes.
Yes, I think my balance was off here. I think that channel was lower. That, by the way, is a 5.1 mix that's been reduced to stereo. So normally it's the center channel is the center sparkler, left and right. But go ahead, level your criticism. I'm willing to hear it.
I'm curious about your recording techniques.
Well, it's varied. Let me think. Going back, the ensemble playing the score on the screen, the Mills College Ensemble was recorded by their engineers. That was a live concert recording. The ensemble piece was recorded at SF Base Studios in Berlin. Man, they had more Neumann microphones than I had ever seen in my life. They had a Neumann console, which I had never seen before. I was like, really? You're going to put that mic on that? Isn't that a little overkill? Oh, it's the only mic we have. So, and the one of the skipping CD and the trumpet, the very first thing you heard, was recorded in the BBC concert hall by their engineers. So I've had really good people doing engineering for me and recording for me, and I've done it myself, and I've had rank amateurs do it. So. Yeah.
If I get the process correctly, with the feedback in the room,
Mm-hmm.
do you start the sound, or are you just hoping to get something from the sound?
Oh, it's not difficult to get feedback. The problem is usually getting rid of it. When you say, is that enough? It's like, getting rid of it's more of a problem.
Because I was wondering, it made me think of I Am Sitting in the Room.
Yes, indeed.
And where we still play with the room.
Right.
Have you ever tried or experimented things with a room playing with another room?
Boy, I've run through every possible variation. I was a true I'm sitting in the room acolyte when I was a student of Allen's, and I must have done 100 variations on that piece in various ways. I'm sitting in a room, for those of you who don't know the piece, Lucien records his voice, and then he plays it through speakers in the room, and he records that with a microphone in the room, and then he does the process again and again and again. And with each generation, the resonances become sharper and sharper and sharper. But you always have this sort of rhythmic content of the speech running through it, so it's like gamelan music, sort of pinging and ringing these tones. Very beautiful piece. It's one of the classics of that period of experimental music. Feedback is kind of the hardcore version of I'm sitting in a room, because things happen like that. You don't have to sit around for 20 minutes while the tape repeats. You know? But it's obviously, both pieces are based on the same principle, which is one where Lucien really made a very strong mark in several of his pieces, which is this idea that in this world we tend to think of pitch at one end of our sort of aesthetic spectrum, clear notes that we can identify, we can sing and everything else. And at the other end we have, God forbid, noise, which is in theory all frequencies at once. And what Lucien did was he found a place in the middle, and he said there's this thing called resonance, which is kind of halfway between noise and pitch. You know, it's when noise is moving towards statistically being a pitch. And that's a really rich area to work in. And anyone who, for example, works with percussion that's what they think about all the time. I mean, that's what gives percussion instruments their character, is the fact that it's this, everyone is a resonator with a very particular sort of sonic feature. So I went into the direction of feedback as a way to sort of find my own little niche in doing pieces about acoustical properties, and sort of bringing out the resonance as a pitch quickly in a relatively controlled fashion. So, yeah.
So you mentioned the subdued feedback pieces. Am I right in thinking that the piece you performed yesterday at La Générale, the first one, with the trumpetist moving from...
Yeah, that was that piece called Pea Soup that had the two boxes on the picture there. Yeah, that was just feedback.
Okay.
Okay, and that was feedback in La Générale. It was live, and then the trumpet was interacting with it.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. And as someone who works with these kinds of other marginal sounds, such as feedback, I don't know if you could maybe call them like parasitic sounds or something, that feed off other sounds. How do you find working like that in practice in a world that kind of tends to try to eliminate such things?
Wow. I don't think I certainly haven't suffered greatly in life, but I would say that I'm 62. For at least the last 40 years, people have been trying to eliminate what I do. And I come back stronger. I'm like some weird monster. I think that, that is a very, very interesting point. The idea that you're making a work that is based on stuff that most people are trying to avoid. And I think that that's actually one of these sort of like axiomatic ideas to have emerged from the avant-garde of the 60s and the 70s, is this notion that you'll have a work, and this works in visual art as well as in sound pieces and music. You'll have pieces in which the material you perceive, the sounds of a piece, the visual aspect of a piece, are not the result of intentional gestures, like drawing a line yourself, but are the result of an accident or the result of something that you're trying to avoid. A fellow student of mine said that there's a large body of work in which the art consists of a residue or a trace of something else. Yeah? Do you know, have you ever had an old book in which there's a color plate and then they put that glassine paper on it to keep it from printing against the other printed page or something. And if you take that and hold it up to the light, if it's a book from the 19th century, you'll see this ghost of the image. They're really beautiful images. And you look at the Audubon print and you look at this and you say, wow, that might even be better. And it's like a trace of the piece that was intended. I think that's a kind of a postmodern idea. If we want to wax philosophical, there's that old line of, can there be poetry after Auschwitz? And poetry after Auschwitz is probably that piece of glassine that sits on the image. It's that idea that we no longer have the power to create that object of beauty in a kind of an honest way. We've soiled everything. So what we have are these sort of these offshoots of it. But as I say, that's very philosophical. And I'm an American, which means we don't have philosophy. We have logotypes. Buzzwords. But you got that out of me. Damn. Have we had enough? These people are looking awful tired.
Just one last question. What is the influence of Chicago
Influence of Chicago.
on your work?
Damn. Are any of you... Okay, you don't have to raise your hand, but just think to yourself, I am German. Not me. You. Think to yourself, if you are, say, I am German. There's that notion of Heimat, right? Heimat. And the New York version of Heimat is also closely linked to chutzpah. good Yiddish word. I do not know a people on earth, and we are in France, more snobbish about where they come from than New Yorkers. And everywhere you go, it's like, not New York, not New York. I've done this around the world. That's a little like New York. That's not like New York. So I have to say that I often am in the position in Chicago of saying, it's not New York. I just say that as a caveat. I've been there 15 years. A couple of years ago, I moved into a really beautiful apartment because I said, if I'm never going to be able to afford this kind of a place in New York, let me get one here. Because I can, and I can't in New York. I am not super connected to the cultural scene in Chicago because I moved there late in life when I had very strong roots in other places that kept me sustained. I use the airport a lot in Chicago. But this is my party line, which is, I think it is very possibly the most important city in North America for music because of the significance it has for the African American population after the Civil War. That at that point when the freed slaves came north, that was the major destination, and that became the city that was responsible for transforming Delta blues into electric blues. It was so critical for the evolution of jazz, so-called jazz music. And then in the 60s, it's where the AACM launched this amazingly creative and horribly misinterpreted music movement. Those of you who are interested in music, if you have not read George Lewis's book, A Power Stronger Than Itself, about the history of the AACM, read it and weep. I mean, it is one of the most compelling and tragic books I've ever read about avant-garde movement not given its due. And then, come the 80s, we had house, and we had a whole sort of weird indie pop scene around the Thrill Jockey label that started out in Chicago. So there's really a lot going on, and I think that for my students, it's incredibly vital because it means that they can flow off campus and go to all this different stuff. The only thing that disappoints me about it is that it's not very well integrated, the music scene. Well, for that matter, on most scenes, it's not very well integrated. I mean, it's a defiantly Jim Crow kind of city in a lot of ways. But I kind of wish there was more interaction between the different threads of music that are going on in the city at the time. That's really a bad answer. I'm leaving you on a down note, folks.
This is a very fair.
Go out and have a drink.
A very fair answer.
Yeah. No place is perfect. There was a great travel book I read once called Around the World in a Bad Mood, which, is probably a good description for me. All right, thank you all very much for coming. It was a real pleasure. You can steal everything. If you can remember my name, you can find my website.